Yeah, good morning, everybody. As Becky said, my name's Martin. I'm a volunteer around here. And if this is your first time at church, let me extend a very specially warm welcome to you this morning. Now, I don't know if this is a good way to start a church talk or not, but I've got a bit of a confession. And my confession, and it may surprise you, it may not, depending on how well you know me, but I love spotting celebrities, okay? And there is a celebrity, no, there's not really, but I was just seeing if, okay. I don't know why this is. I've not got that special, I want to be that person type look. I think what it ultimately probably boils down to is I want to have those stories where I can go, I've met them. I like that kind of idea of I could tell that story. Now, for me, this is especially true when it comes to sports stars, because I am obsessed with sport, and the idea of seeing sports stars in the flesh that I've watched on TV or from afar is just like an ultimate dream. I absolutely love this idea. Last year, Sarah and I went to Wimbledon to watch some of the tennis amongst a bigger group of people. And one of the other members of the group throughout the day said to us, I saw Tom Cruise. And I was like, right, I'm cruise hunting the rest of the day. Didn't get anywhere near him, saw him from afar, but it doesn't really count. Definitely doesn't really count at all. But I just love that idea of talking to people who have a completely different life experience to me. That whole idea of they live in a completely removed world to the ones that I, and probably most of us, live in as well. So if you do know any famous people, please come and tell me afterwards, because I genuinely love a little chat. It'll be really, really interesting. Now, before I sound like I need to be monitored by the police or something, what's more remarkable is when you see celebrities in places you least expect them to be in. You know, the whole kind of Hollywood A-lister spotted in Oldborough Co-op type story, where the local news goes mad for it. Well, a couple of years ago, Sarah and I, plus Becky and her family, were on holiday, and Sarah had this genius idea that we should go to a car boot sale. Sense my tone. I am not a fan of car boot sales at all. But in sickness and in health, all that. So we head off to this co-op, and I'm probably in a grump, or what's more likely is Tim and I are walking side by side, just chatting about sport. And I see this guy that looks vaguely familiar about a few rows over, and I nudge Tim and go, that guy looks like Paul Gascoigne, Tim. And then Tim goes, I think it is Paul Gascoigne. And so we had to go and take a little look. And it was Paul Gascoigne. The Gazza was actually there. So, of course, Tim and I had to go and have a little chat with him. And he was a lovely, lovely, lovely man. We did not expect to see Paul Gascoigne at a car boot sale. And when we see people in places at least that we least expect it, it can really surprise us. Just like with this chap who couldn't quite believe that what he was witnessing was true.
What I find most tricky is when people don't recognize you particularly, but half recognize you. You know, it's that strange thing where they go... Of course, that means they stare. They stare a lot. And they just look. You're sort of feeling, I wish that person wouldn't stare at me. So, you know, I'd rather just, you know, hold up a flag saying, yes. Yes, it's me. A few years ago, there was, I was in a Land Rover parts department near Peterborough, the kind of place you find me on most Saturdays. And we're waiting for car parts. And car parts, guys hang around a lot because, you know, to get a part, the guy has to go half a mile to the back of the warehouse and then come back again, and he brings it back. And he says, this is a left-hand one. Oh, you wanted a right-hand one? Sorry, I'll go. It goes, and it takes forever. Anyway, I was standing around with a group of guys, and I could see this guy doing that. And he came up to me after a while, and he said, excuse me, has anyone ever told you that you're the absolute spitting image of that Mr. Bean? And I said, well, actually, I am the actor who plays Mr. Bean. And he said, I bet you wish you were. And there followed this bizarre conversation in which the more I tried to claim that I was the person whom he thought I merely resembled, the less he believed me. So but what was funny was how close he thought I was to you know, he said the resemblance is uncanny. Have you ever thought of doing any, you know, look-alike work, like stagnates and headnates. You can go along as Mr. Bean.
I really hope that the guy who that story was about watched that Graham Norton show and was like, no way, I've missed that opportunity. But we will remember stories where the unexpected happens, don't we? Or when we find ourselves on the other side of the fence to where we normally would. It's noteworthy when somebody turns the tables upside down and acts in a way that we really don't expect them to. And there have been plenty of pieces of literature, film, and TV about that. If you're a bit of a bookworm, maybe you've read The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain. This story where a member of royalty and impoverished citizens swap roles and kind of see what it's like to live in somebody else's very different shoes. Maybe you've seen the 1980s film Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd in it, where something similar happens. Or maybe you're a bit more of a kind of Freaky Friday fan, where the mum and the daughter swap places. Well, if that is you, I've got great news. There's a sequel out later this year, Freakier Friday. Where do they get the ideas from? I don't know. Or maybe you're less into your fiction and more into things like Secret Millionaire, where these incredibly wealthy people go and live incognito in impoverished communities and see what it's like. Well, whatever your preferred mode of entertainment, most of us like these kind of stories. They're interesting because the unexpected happens. And when we come across people in places that we don't really expect them to be. And if you've been around church for a while, you'll know that Jesus is known for many things, and that one of these is doing the opposite of what people would have expected, and being found in situations where he really shouldn't have been, given his status. In fact, the more you study Jesus' life, the more we should be kind of expecting the unexpected. And when we look at the stories of his life that we find in these 4 books of the Bible that we call the Gospels, these almost biographies of Jesus' life, we regularly see him turning situations, expectations, and outcomes on their heads. And as we journey towards Easter and beyond as a church, we're going to deep dive into 4 moments in this Easter story where Jesus traded places. Where he traded places in incredibly unexpected ways, and think about how we might employ some of that learning in our own lives as we look to imitate Jesus and follow his example. And we're going to find ourselves in 4 different locations throughout this series. In week 4, Becky is going to take us to a lake. Steve is going to take us to a garden in week 3, and also next week to a hill on the outskirts of Jerusalem. And it's actually on the outskirts of Jerusalem where we find ourselves today. And we're going to find ourselves in a place that's become known as the Upper Room. And many academics believe that this place is actually just outside the city walls of Jerusalem. And because of the story we're going to read today, it's now visited by thousands of pilgrims each and every year. Because in this story, we see Jesus and his disciples doing something perfectly normal. They're sat down about to have a meal. And we find this account in the book of John, one of these 4 gospel writers. And John's gospel, although he does the same as the others in terms of telling some of the key events of Jesus' life, John's much more direct about making us aware of the spiritual significance of what is going on in the story. And actually for John, he's on a mission to prove to us why Jesus is indeed the Son of God and why we should build our life upon him. And because of this, as we go through this account this morning, I'm going to encourage you to pay attention to it in 2 different ways. Firstly, I want you to note what it says about leveraging our leadership and our power and our opportunities to serve others. Because even if you're in this room and wouldn't call yourself a Christian, and by the way, I really hope you get a sense that we want you to belong in this community, even if you're not quite at that belief stage yet, I think we'd all agree that the world could do with more serving others and less exploiting our positions of power. But the second way is sensing the underlying, deeper meaning about how Jesus changed and leveraged his powers in the most extraordinary way in order to save you and I. And with Easter on the horizon, I really hope that you get a renewed sense of that, or if it's for the first time, a really new sense of how much Jesus loves you for the sacrifices that he was willing to make. So let's jump in, and we find this in John chapter 13. And John really sets the scene for us early when he says that it was just before the Passover festival. And Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So essentially, it's a bit of an introduction, this line. John's telling us where they were, what they were doing. And because of this introduction, we know that this would have been on a Thursday night. They were on a Thursday night and they were about to have something called the Seder meal as part of the Jewish Passover festival. And Seder means order. And what that tells us is, in kind of Jewish tradition, as they celebrated this festival of Passover, or Pesach in Hebrew, they would have had very clear expectations on what was going to happen. It was incredibly ritualistic because it had been laid out for them in their scriptures of what they should do, when they should do it, how they should do it, as they celebrated this festival. And in fact, in modern Jewish life, they would use one of these books known as a Haggadah to kind of talk them through what to do at certain points. It would tell them what bits of the story, and the story being the one where Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt, what to say when to have a sip of wine, when to eat certain food, and so on and so forth. So it's a very structured, ordered event. And so the disciples and those there would have had these big expectations on what was about to happen. Well, we also see that as the evening meal was in progress, the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Now, I've hinted at already how we can learn about using power for good through this story, but John juxtaposes this against Judas using his power to gain, and in his sense, to gain wealth at Jesus' expense. If we carry on, it then says that Jesus knew that the Father, God, had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. In other words, John's telling us Jesus knows that what we now call Easter is about to happen. And so because Jesus knew that, it looks like he had a plan that he needed to do something. So it says he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. This went out the window. Jesus gave up that and replaced it with that and this. He flipped the expectations of that evening in that one little action. I want you to sense the incredulity that the disciples would have had right now. It would be like me standing up here, you expecting me to talk and doing some kind of weird dance. It's not going to happen, okay? But that's the idea here. And it then says that he turned to Simon Peter, one of his disciples, and Peter looks at him and goes, "Are you going to wash my feet?" Because that would have been weird. I tried to think of an equivalent. Now, some of you might have kind of foot phobia. I know that people have that. So if you've got a foot phobia, you can already sense why this is going to be weird. But I want to kind of give another bit of a modern story of this to kind of show what it's like. I want you to imagine you invited your boss or somebody that you've got loads of respect for over to your house, along with some co-workers for a meal. And you just sit down about to start the meal and you have this sudden sinking feeling that you forgot to clean the bathroom. And you'd had a rather spicy curry the night before, and it didn't sit overly well on your stomach. I think you're getting the picture, right? And then your boss says, I'm just going to go wash my hands, and you're like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do here? Because you're embarrassed. You're embarrassed they're going to see your bathroom in this state. But what your boss does, grabs a toilet brush, grabs all the cleaning stuff, and scrubs your bathroom from the bottom to the top. They come back, put their nice clothes back on, and sit down ready to eat. This is the equivalent to what is happening here. Because foot washing was a dirty, disgusting job that would often involve washing off sweat, dirt, and human and animal feces from those feet. Because this is before the times of flushable toilets and great sewage systems. And people were walking around in sandals at best. I think you're getting that picture too, right? So you can see why this was a real kind of trading places, flipping the expectations moment. But then Jesus replies and says, look, you don't realize what I'm doing now, but later you will understand. Now, this isn't saying the disciples are stupid and you can't tell that he's about to wash feet, but he's hinting at this spiritual significance. That Jesus is showing how he's giving up his power to do good for people. Peter's still not having it. No, you're not washing my feet. And Jesus said, look, unless I wash you, you've got no part with me. Jesus didn't really care that much about feet. He's saying, look, if you want to be my follower, you've got to be cleansed inside and out. And I'm going to do that for you, now with your feet, but with more in the coming days. And then Simon Peter seems to have this sudden realization, because then he's like, okay, not just my feet, but my hands and head as well. And then Jesus kind of confuses it a bit more by saying, look, those who've had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean. Not every one of you. Imagine how Judas feels at that point, because he's being super pointed towards Judas. Because Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him, and that's why he said not everyone was clean. John really wants us all to know that Judas was there. He hadn't slunk away yet. He was still there, having his feet washed as well. And Judas didn't deserve it. But when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. He says, do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, because that's what I am. But now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. Jesus still washed Judas's feet too. Sometimes when we look at some of the ways Jesus taught people in parables or some of the stuff he said, the meaning's quite hard to make sense of, and you've got to work really hard. I don't think it is here. I think he's being super direct. Go and follow my example. He's saying, don't go and use your power and opportunities to exploit people or get one over somebody. Serve others. Wherever we have leadership roles, we should be an example of servant leadership. And when I was thinking about this in preparation for this talk, two people came to my mind when I thought about servant leaders. The first one is my boss at work. Because whenever there is an event at work, he's the last one there putting the chairs and the tables away. If anybody has a big issue going on in their life, he'll step in to help them as best he can. He'll go the extra mile. When the canteen staff are short, he'll jump on the tills, not asking one of us to do it instead. And I'm really grateful to work for a man like that. And I hope you've got people that you can think of like that as well. The second person that springs to mind is this guy, Steve Fenning. We are led as a church by a truly authentic Christ follower. If you was to stay around at the end of most services, right till the end, he's the one putting the chairs away. If you're here early enough, he's the one putting them out so we've got somewhere to sit, along with other volunteers as well. And then he'll hand out the pastries to the volunteers. And I know that Steve and Sarah regularly have people in their house to offer them some respite just because that's what they believe they should do. He is a great example of a servant leader. So, Steve, I want to take this opportunity to thank you, not just on my behalf, but on behalf of the church as well. Yeah. Jesus said, I've set an example that you should do as I have done for you. No servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them. I don't like this word blessed because we in the West have ruined it. If you spend time on social media, #blessed. Well, what does that even mean? Well, really, when Jesus says we'll be blessed if we do them, it means we'll be able to experience what God would want from his kingdom here on earth. And we'll get this pure joy from doing what God would want us to do. And I think we can experience this if we're willing to trade places just like Jesus did. So an obvious question then, church. Who do you need to trade places with? Where do you need to humble yourself? Is it at work where there's loads of dirty mugs and plates by the sink and it's not your turn to clear up, but you could do it anyway? Is it at home where you could do those extra jobs to take the burden off your spouse or your housemates? The supermarket queue where you can let somebody else go in front of you even if it puts you out a little bit? Is it at school or college where you could carry on the gossip about that person or you could use your influence to stick up for them? Is it through church where you can give up your time and maybe your money, as we've seen spoken about already today, but in terms of our time to serve, maybe through our furniture bank, through base bites, through our kids' work, whatever it is? Or forgive me for taking this to a whole deeper level for a minute. Where do you have power that you could give up, even if that person or group of people don't really deserve it? Because this is where Jesus traded power for humility. Because Jesus chose to humble himself. He got humble so that he could get messy to sort out the messes that we get ourselves messed up in. Let me say that again, because there's a lot of mess in that sentence. Jesus got messy to sort out the messes that we get ourselves messed up in. And we probably don't deserve it because it's our fault. That word, humble or humility, has Latin origins, and it literally means on the ground. It means not to see yourself as above anybody else. When Jesus was washing their feet, he would have been literally kneeling on the ground, physically showing them that he wasn't above them, that he was there to serve. So if you're thinking about whether you are humbling yourself, whether you are using your power for good, the truth is you'll be humbling yourself like Jesus did if the job's really dirty, if the job's not respected, if instead of getting accolades you cause confusion, if the job ultimately seems beneath you and you're serving people that don't deserve it. About 8 years ago, a group of 7 of us from here at the Forge went out to Denver in the States, serving alongside a mission partner we had at the time. And we were staying and working in the city, serving the homeless, the abused, the forlorn, the forgotten, the needy. And each morning before we go out, one of the team would lead us in, a bit of a churchy word here, a devotional. We were just trying to get our heads in the space to really think carefully about what we were doing. And on one of the days, one of the team members, Tony Hart, who you'll sometimes see serving hospitality here after the services, he reminded us of this story we've talked about this morning. And he washed our feet. And he washed our feet before we went out and washed feet in that community in a different way. And I think you could make a pretty compelling argument that some of the people we were helping that day didn't deserve what we were doing for them because they were abusing substances, committing crimes, or making life choices that probably aren't that wise and ended up being in those positions they're in. Similarly to this, I love how every Christmas as a church we run our hampers appeal and we give around 150 hampers to people around Mid Suffolk that are needy and need that support. Yet I know some people, church-going people, maybe some of you in the room, who don't ultimately believe that's the right thing to do because those gifts might not be appreciated and they might just sell it on and they don't really deserve it because they're not doing the right things. They're buying their cigarettes, they've got their Sky TV or whatever. And to an extent, I can understand that logic. But if we're really going to follow Jesus, sometimes we have to trade logic and put love in its place. And it will be messy and it will be hard to understand. But remember that Jesus washed Judas's feet too. He didn't banish him, he washed his feet. Throughout his life, Jesus placed himself in places we wouldn't expect. Places where he chose to leverage his power in order to love people. And I think Jesus showed us his priorities loud and clear. And his priorities are these. He put people over his position. He put people over his pride. He put people over his power. And he put people over his principles. And he also showed us that with great power comes great opportunity. It's not Spider-Man. Come on, people. But he showed us that with great power, we give ourselves opportunities to love, opportunities to serve, and opportunities to humble ourselves. And you know what? This really matters. This really matters because when we take opportunity to do this, people stand up and take notice and think, what are those church people doing? Why are they doing it? If you were here a couple of weeks ago or have been tracking online during our vision series, Steve shared a story of a couple who were in Lidl in Stowmarket and how they were good Samaritans and really helped pay for somebody shopping who was really, really needy. And it got loads of traction on social media just because it seems so out of the ordinary. How cool would it be if that wasn't out of the ordinary and our churches flooded our community with this kind of generosity, this kind of love, this kind of use of our power and opportunities? How cool would it be if people stood up and realized that's what the church really stands for? That's what Jesus is really all about. Because if you're calling yourself a Christian, we're essentially on God's marketing team. We're a walking, talking, acting advertisement for what God is like and what a life based on Jesus' guidance should look like. Sometimes I hate the church. I don't mean ours. I mean the church. You've probably not heard that said in church before. Because it's too often known for placing principles over people, power over people, its position over people. And I get annoyed because Jesus didn't do that. A couple of weeks ago, I saw this on social media, which is that Jesus came to illustrate, demonstrate, and communicate what God is like. That's pretty cool. He came to illustrate, demonstrate, and communicate what God is like. And God is people first. And as we continue with this series next week, as we get to that hill outside of Jerusalem, we'll see just how far Jesus was willing to humble himself in order to put people first. Paul, the writer of so many parts of what we now call the New Testament, wrote about this in a letter he wrote to a group of Christians in a place called Philippi, which you'd find in eastern Greece. And I think it's beautifully explained in a translation of the Bible called The Message, where we can read this. Paul says we should think of ourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Some of us really like our status. Well, how much do you cling to it rather than using it to help? Paul says Jesus didn't do that at all. And it was an incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death shortly after washing some feet. And it was the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. That's how far Jesus was willing to leverage his power for us. He traded power for humility for us. Because for Jesus, it's always people over his position, people over his pride, people over his power. It's people first. And earlier on in the story, he said, I'm setting you an example that we should all follow. So it's probably time we went and washed some feet.